Hi everyone! I wanted to do something a little different today and share my experience making a craft that I have never before attempted, and that is shoemaking. I came across this book in a store a few months ago and I thought it looked really well put together and made me feel that this was a project I could actually succeed at despite having no cobbling skills whatsoever. So, this video is going to be a documentary of the full process from start to finish, and also kind of a book review so you can see if this is something you'd want to attempt. I've also included the mistakes I made, so hopefully you can avoid them. The book is called The Sandal Making Workshop by Rachel Corey, and along with detailed instructions, has templates in the back for you to trace. I read the instructions through a few times before getting started because I had limited materials and didn't want to waste anything. The first step was to make some patterns from the templates that are included in the book. I'm a US woman size 11, but although I'm a large shoe size, my feet are actually on the narrower side, so I ended up trimming down the leather soles after initially using this template. I found the templates to be a helpful starting point though. I started with cutting the outsoles, which are the bottom layer to your sandal. I had a really hard time finding affordable leather in the right weight and in small quantities, but I managed to find some on Etsy along with a couple other leather supplies, so I'll link that shop in the description for you. These soles were pre-cut, but I of course needed to trim them down to fit my template. I was also able to get these heel blocks from the same Etsy store to make my own stacked heel. Rachel instructs you to wet your leather before cutting it with a utility knife, and it really makes a big difference. I really didn't want to buy new tools for this project, so I'm glad I could make the utility knife work, even though it was a struggle. My finger did go numb at one point, but spoiler alert, there were no trips to the ER. Eventually I figured out that it was easier to shave off little bits at a time rather than trying to do one deep cut along the line. I decided to make my stacked heel next. You joined all your leather together using glue. Rachel says to use water-based leather glue for the uppers and solvent-based glue for the outsoles so you don't have to deal with the smelly solvent glue as much. But again, I didn't want to buy a million things for this project, so I ended up using a solvent-based glue for the whole shoe. Before you glue anything, you have to score your leather so the adhesive will have something to hold on to. Luckily, I had an awl on hand I could use. I also wanted to add some rubber on the bottom of the heels for added grip. The book doesn't have instructions for this, but my hours spent watching ASMR shoe repair videos on YouTube paid off in that I knew to cut the rubber a little larger than my heel and trim it down after it was glued. When you use this glue, you need to apply it and then let it get tacky for 15 minutes or so. Then you can carefully stick your layers together. I found this shoe anvil at an antique store for around $20. It ended up being really handy in this process, so if you can find an anvil of some sort, it will make your life a lot easier. You can get special hammers for cobbling, but I thought my rubber mallet would work well for reinforcing the glued layers. Rachel does advise you that you need to keep the straight edges of your heel block as aligned as possible since you won't be able to sand that side once it's attached to the sole. The last step for finishing these was to trim the rubber. Next, it was time to shape my outsoles by rinsing them with water and then bending them into a shape that would conform to the foot. The first time I tried this, I shaped it from the wrong side and had to do it again. So just remember that the smooth side of the leather is the bottom. Next, it was time to work on the uppers. I drew my own pattern based on the templates provided in the book. I'm used to creating paper patterns because of my fashion design background, but you really don't need to design anything for yourself if you don't want to. The book has everything you need. One of the reasons I was interested in this project is because I have all of this vegetable tanned leather left over from my fashion school days, and I thought this would be a great way to use it up. I initially traced my design onto leather that was the right stiffness but was too thin. I ended up retracing onto slightly thicker leather that was also softer. Ideally, you want something more stiff to hold its shape better, but I wanted to work with what I had. So I need to talk about the soles for a second. In the instructions for most of the shoe projects, it just says to buy heavy leather soles. So when I saw these heavy leather soles pre-cut on Etsy, I thought perfect. But it turns out that one person's heavy leather sole is another person's very heavy leather sole. The soles that I bought are about 2 millimeters thicker than what Rachel recommends, which doesn't sound like a lot, but actually adds about 7 ounces of weight. I didn't realize my mistake until it was too late, so these sandals ended up being much heavier than they needed to be. The outsole was fine, but I really should have used a lighter weight for the footbed, so please don't make my mistake. Having said that, the next step is to mark on the footbed where you want the straps to sit on your foot using an awl. The points you mark will be where the straps are inserted later. Use a leather punch to punch out the points you marked, which luckily I already owned, but because I used a leather that was far too thick, I really struggled with this step. Again, don't use an outsole leather for your footbed. If you've managed to punch the holes in your footbed, you then use a utility knife to connect the two holes to form the slots. In the book, Rachel says this part is not at all scary and is quite forgiving, and I have to disagree wholeheartedly with her on that. It is scary and not as forgiving as I hoped it would be. If you make the slots too big, it will show and not look great. Once the slots are cut, you can again drape the straps on your foot, this time inserting the ends into the slots you made and taping them on the underside with masking tape. When you have them in the right position, trace the overhang on the underside with a Sharpie and reorient the tape into a hinge so that you know where to put the glue. As I did before, I have to score the area where the glue will go. I tried to work assembly line style, so this was the point where I scored my outsoles so I could glue the heel block and the straps at the same time. Again, apply the glue and let it get tacky before attaching. After applying the heel block, Rachel recommends reinforcing it with brass shoe tacks. I have to say it was so hard finding small quantities of these things. Everywhere I managed to find them, they were $50 or more because they came in huge amounts. I'll link to where I eventually found them in the description to save you the time. I thought my tack hammer would be perfect for, would you believe it, hammering tacks, but I couldn't get them to go in all the way, so I ended up not putting any tacks in the final stages of the process, even though Rachel recommends it. I was worried about being able to feel them on the sole of my foot, and I didn't want to risk it. The last gluing stage is to join the footbed to the outsole. Since I wasn't going to add tacks at this stage, I gave the soles a good hammer with the mallet and squeezed around the outside. After this, you need to sand the edges smooth with the belt sander. Rachel says there's really no other substitute. You can't use a Dremel or a sandpaper. I didn't record that step because I had to use my dad's belt sander at my parents' house, but afterwards you'll trim the little lip on the edge with a knife. So the sandal's almost done. I wanted to spruce it up a bit by painting a pattern with leather paint. Super easy and straightforward. Finally, I needed to add hardware for the strap closure, so I used screwback studs I had on hand to make the keyhole style closure from the book. And here are the sandals all finished. Overall, I would recommend this book. It's definitely not for beginner crafters, and you may need to spend some money up front, but if you're confident working with leather and sharp tools, give it a try. Let me know down in the comments if you're going to attempt your own sandal project. Also, if you enjoyed spending this time with me, I want to let you know that I teach online creative classes that you can enjoy from the comfort of your own home. These are structured lessons that are tailored to beginners and cover a range of arts and crafts that I've been practicing for many years. You can click the link in the description to learn more. Until next time, happy crafting!